Isabella had exhausted every possible option. She had visited countless banks, credit unions, and lending institutions, pleading for a loan, only to leave empty-handed each time. No one was willing to take a chance on her. To them, she was just another applicant with no means of repayment. Worse still, the endless lists of requirements they demanded were things she simply couldn't provide. Now, as she made her way toward the nearest bus stop, frustration weighed heavily on her shoulders. That was when she spotted Mr. Parker, the owner of the small grocery store near the farmer's market. "Oh, Isabella, how are you?" he called out, his round face splitting into a wide grin as he hurried toward her. She instinctively grimaced, unable to ignore the way the rolls of fat beneath his chin jiggled with each step, moving in sync with his large belly. "I'm all right, sir," she replied, though in truth, his presence irritated her. Still, she forced herself to engage. If there was even the slightest chance he could lend her money, she had to take it. Desperation left no room for pride. "And how's your father doing these days?" Mr. Parker asked, his tone casual. "That's the problem," she admitted. "I need money to pay his bail and to settle things with the person he accidentally shot." Mr. Parker nodded thoughtfully. "Have you had any luck finding the funds?" Isabella's shoulders slumped. She shook her head, her stomach tightening. "Well," he said, his voice carrying an air of amusement, "I suppose I could lend you some." Her head snapped up. "Really?" she asked, barely able to contain her excitement. "Oh, Mr. Parker, you're a godsend." The old man chuckled, revealing yellowed teeth that looked as if they hadn't seen a toothbrush in days. Isabella quickly averted her gaze. He was neither handsome nor particularly hygienic, and the sight of him made her stomach churn. "But of course," he continued, his tone shifting, "there's something I want in return, Isabella." She nodded eagerly. "I'll pay you back little by little, and as for interest, maybe I could do your laundry for a year." She forced a sweet smile, hoping to strike a fair deal. Parker stroked his chin, his eyes roaming her body with an unsettling slowness. From her head to her toes and then lingering on her chest, his leering gaze sent a shiver of unease through her. "That's not the kind of payment I'm after," he said, his voice thick with insinuation. "You know what I want, Isabella. That sweet little body of yours. Just a taste." He licked his lips, his expression dripping with vile desire. Revulsion surged through her. Without another word, she spun on her heel and walked away, fists clenched. She had wasted her time. No, worse than that, she had walked straight into the hands of a predator. Shoulders slumping, Isabella trudged home, frustration pressing down on her like a heavy weight. By the time she arrived, it was barely 4 in the afternoon, yet the familiar scent of simmering broth and sautéed vegetables filled the air. Her mother, Lyra, was already busy in the small, dimly lit kitchen, stirring a pot on the stove. Dinner had to be prepared early. Soon she would have to take a portion to Isabella's father at the county jail. He had been arrested after a drunken night that had spiraled out of control. Tensions had run high, words had turned into threats, and then one of the men, his so-called drinking buddy, had pulled out a gun. In the chaos, Isabella's father had tried to intervene, struggling to wrestle the firearm away, but in that split second, the gun had gone off, wounding a man. The true owner of the weapon had fled the scene, likely fearing the consequences. As it later turned out, he had no license to carry. Now the injured man lay in a hospital bed, recovering from surgery and demanding a hefty sum in compensation. On top of that, bail had to be posted for her father. The weight of it all was suffocating. "Nana, Mom," Isabella greeted softly, bowing her head respectfully as she entered the kitchen. She cast a glance at the pot of simmering vegetables, inhaling the simple, comforting aroma that did little to ease her distress. Her mother turned from the stove, wiping her hands on her apron. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice careful, expectant. Isabella drew in a deep breath, then let it out in defeat. She met her mother's weary gaze. "Nowhere, Mother," she admitted, her voice laced with regret. But then, forcing a brave front, she quickly added, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll find a way. I'm heading back out later. I won't stop until Dad is out of jail." Lyra sighed heavily before stepping forward and wrapping her daughter in a tight embrace. "Your father," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I've told him time and time again to stop drinking, but he never listens." A quiet sob escaped her as she clung to Isabella. Isabella held her mother close, though her own emotions were on the verge of breaking. "It's done now, Mom," she said, her tone firm despite the ache in her chest. "There's nothing we can do about what's already happened. All we can do is move forward." Lyra nodded against her shoulder. "I'll eat quickly, then shower and head out again," Isabella continued, forcing herself to sound resolute. Later, behind the closed bathroom door, Isabella let go. Tears streamed down her face, silent but relentless. They were already struggling just to keep food on the table, and now this. How were they supposed to come up with such a large sum? She pressed her hands against the cool sink, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. "Fight on, Isabella," she whispered to herself. She had no choice. She had to be strong. Out of her shower, she changed into fresh clothes and sat down for a quick meal. Across the room, her mother was gathering supplies for the visit to the station. Containers of food, a spare set of clothes, anything her father might need. The sudden sound of hurried footsteps outside broke the silence. "Mom!" a young voice called breathlessly. A moment later, two of Isabella's younger siblings burst into the house, panting. "Mom, Andy is here," one of them blurted out. "He's collecting what Dad owes him." Isabella and her mother exchanged a look. Lyra's face darkened with unease, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "I'll handle it," Isabella said before her mother could protest. Without hesitation, she pushed her half-eaten meal aside and rose to her feet. Bracing herself, she stepped outside. "Good afternoon," Isabella said politely, forcing a composed tone as she addressed Andy. His muscular arms, covered in tattoos, flexed slightly as he crossed them over his chest. "I need my money, Isabella," he said bluntly, his voice edged with impatience. She swallowed hard, already anticipating his response. "Andy, we really don't have anything right now," she pleaded. "Please, could you give us just a month's extension?" "A month?" His eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint flashing through them, making Isabella's stomach twist with dread. "That's not possible," her breath caught. "3 days," he continued, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. "I'll be back in 3 days, and if you still can't pay up, I'll have to take whatever valuables I can get." He didn't wait for a response. He simply turned on his heel and walked away, his heavy footsteps echoing against the pavement. Isabella stood frozen, her body trembling as she watched him disappear down the street. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision as she tilted her head skyward. "God, please help us," she whispered. "Please don't abandon us." She wiped her cheeks quickly, unwilling to let despair take over. She had to stay strong. Just as she turned to head back inside, another unwelcome figure approached. Miss Helen. The landlady strode toward her with a tight-lipped smile, one that held no warmth, only thinly veiled exasperation. As she scratched the palm of her hand, Isabella recognized the familiar gesture. It was a habit of hers whenever she was about to demand payment. "Isabella," Miss Helen greeted, her tone sickly sweet. "Good afternoon, Miss Helen," Isabella said, her voice measured. "I'll get straight to the point. You know why I'm here," Miss Helen said, her patience already wearing thin. Isabella swallowed back her rising panic. "We really don't have any money right now, Miss Helen," she admitted, desperation creeping into her voice. "You know what happened to my dad, right?" Miss Helen let out a sharp breath, clearly unimpressed. "Even before that happened, I was having a hard time collecting rent from you," she pointed out. "I'm tired of coming back here. I'm sorry, but it's been 5 months since you last paid. If you still can't come up with the money, then you need to leave." "Please don't be like that," Isabella begged, bowing her head in humility. Miss Helen scoffed. "This place isn't a shelter, Isabella. In fact, I've been more than generous with you." Her voice rose with each word cutting through the air like a blade. "If you actually stopped to think about it, you'd realize just how lenient I've been." Isabella bit her lip, her heart pounding. 5 months, Miss Helen continued, her frustration boiling over. 5 whole months and you haven't paid a single cent. And don't forget, last time your electricity was about to be cut off, and who covered it? Me? That wasn't my responsibility, Isabella. I didn't use a single watt of that electricity. Their eyes locked, and Isabella knew deep down that Miss Helen wasn't wrong. Most landlords wouldn't have tolerated 2 months of non-payment, let alone 5. They would have thrown her family out long ago, maybe even dragged them to court. But knowing that didn't change the fact that she had nowhere else to go. Miss Helen let out a long, exasperated breath, shaking her head as if she had finally run out of patience. "All right," she said flatly. "Just move out, leave." Panic surged through Isabella. She took a step forward, shaking her head in desperation. "Miss Helen, please don't do this," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Don't make us leave. I promise, I swear, I'll find a way. Just give us another month, please." She inhaled sharply, willing herself to stay calm, though her hands trembled at her sides. Miss Helen studied her for a long moment, lips pressed into a thin line. Then, with a heavy sigh, she relented. "1 week," she said firmly. "That's all I can give you, 1 week, or you leave." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Isabella standing there, her entire body numb. When she stepped back inside, her younger siblings ran to her, their little faces streaked with tears, their small arms wrapped around her tightly as they sobbed. In the corner of the room, their mother sat quietly, hugging herself, silent tears slipping down her face. "Don't cry," Isabella murmured, crouching down to her siblings' level. She wiped their damp cheeks with her thumbs, forcing a reassuring smile despite the storm inside her. "Big sis will figure something out, I promise." One of the younger ones sniffled and looked up at her, eyes filled with innocent hope. "Sis, I hope Dad gets out of jail soon." Isabella swallowed the lump in her throat. "Yes," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Your sister will do everything she can." She reached out and smoothed their hair. "Now, hush, let's eat first. I'm going out again to look for money." The children obediently shuffled toward the small kitchen, though their eyes still shone with fear. The sight made Isabella's chest tighten. They were too young to bear this kind of worry. Their mother wiped her face with the back of her hand and stood. "I should be going soon," she said softly. "Your father will be waiting for his meal." She turned to the children. "Once you're all inside, lock the doors and windows, understand?" They nodded, their little heads bobbing in unison. After finishing her meal, Isabella grabbed her worn-out shawl and stepped out into the evening air. The streets were busy with the usual evening crowd, vendors packing up their stalls while night workers started their shifts. Isabella wandered aimlessly, her mind drowning in endless thoughts of money, rent, bail, each worry pulling at her sanity like a relentless tide. She barely noticed where her feet had taken her until she found herself near the store across from Mr. Parker's house. "Hey, Isabella!" The familiar voice snapped her from her trance. She turned to see Dawn, her childhood friend, waving at her from the other side of the street. Dawn worked at a club nearby. She was dressed in a fitted blouse and skinny jeans, her long hair pulled into a high ponytail. Unlike Isabella, she looked well put together, as if life hadn't been as unkind to her, forcing a tight-lipped smile. Isabella greeted her. "How are things?" Dawn asked, stepping closer. Her voice was warm, but there was unmistakable sympathy in her eyes. "I heard what happened to your dad." Isabella's smile faltered, her expression darkening. "Yeah," she murmured, lowering her gaze. Dawn let out a small sigh but didn't press further. Instead, she walked into the corner store. "I need to buy some shampoo," she told the clerk casually. Isabella waited by the door, lost in thought, until she noticed Dawn peering across the street. Her friend smirked. "That old guy, Mr. Parker, really likes you, doesn't he?" she teased, raising an eyebrow. Isabella lowered her gaze, her stomach twisting with unease. It seemed like everyone in the neighborhood knew about Mr. Parker's unsettling interest in her. The very thought of it made her skin crawl. He was old, unhygienic, and always carried an unpleasant stench, a mix of stale sweat and something sour that lingered in the air around him. She doubted she could stomach being near him, let alone entertaining his advances. She might quite literally throw up. Dawn, as if sensing her thoughts, studied her closely. Isabella avoided her gaze, not wanting to discuss the repulsive subject any further. "If you can't bring yourself to be with him," Dawn said, tilting her head slightly, "why not just work at my place instead?" Isabella arched an eyebrow. "Is the pay really that high?" she asked, her curiosity piqued despite herself. Dawn grinned. "Oh, for sure. Especially for someone like you, young, beautiful, and still untouched. You'd be in high demand. You just have to be tough enough to handle it. But don't worry, you get to pick your customers." Isabella stared at Dawn, her mind spinning. There was something terrifying about what her friend was suggesting, but at the same time, there was a glimmer of hope buried beneath the fear. Anything is better than Mr. Parker, Dawn teased, wrinkling her nose in disgust. That creep wouldn't even pay you well, and let's be real, you'd never be able to wash off the grossness. Isabella said nothing, simply looking at her friend, weighing the unspoken offer. Dawn sighed and slung her purse over her shoulder. Well, I need to head home and take a shower. You know where I live and you know where I work, Isabella. Think about it. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Isabella standing there, her thoughts a chaotic mess. Shaking herself out of it, she started walking toward the busy street where Chris sold hot dogs and peanuts on a street corner. She spotted her friend behind the cart, flipping sausages on the grill, their savory scent filling the evening air. I'm desperate, Isabella admitted the moment she sat down beside Chris, the weight of her burdens pressing heavily on her shoulders. We owe so many people money and Dad is still in jail. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away before they could fall. If only I could help you, Chris said softly, glancing at her with deep concern. If only I were rich. Isabella managed a small, weary smile. She put an arm around Chris's shoulder and leaned against her friend for comfort, taking solace in their familiar presence. I just spoke with Dawn, she murmured. Chris stiffened slightly. Protective as always, they turned to face her with a serious expression. Chris had always been wary of Dawn's world, knowing the dangers that lurked beneath its surface. But tonight there was no lecture, no immediate protest, just silent understanding. Are you sure? Chris asked, voice low but steady. Isabella exhaled slowly, then nodded. I have no choice, she whispered. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. Just be careful. And pick the cute, sexy customers, Chris teased, trying to lighten the heavy mood. Isabella let out a snort, rolling her eyes. Yeah, I'll make sure to pick someone who can make my eyes roll back, she joked, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they both burst into laughter. For a brief, fleeting moment, Isabella felt a little lighter. The weight pressing down on her chest didn't disappear, but at least it loosened just a bit. She sat there for a while, lost in thought, carefully weighing her options. Then, once she'd gathered enough courage, she stood up, determination replacing her hesitation. I'm going to see Dawn, she announced. She's probably leaving the house any minute now. Chris gave her a firm nod. Good luck. Come see me tomorrow at my place, all right? Update me. Isabella mustered a small smile before turning on her heel and heading toward Dawn's house. As she approached, she spotted 3 women standing outside, each holding a cigarette between her fingers. They were dressed stylishly, their heels clicking softly against the pavement as they shifted their weight, their eyes scanning the street like they were waiting for something, or someone. Isabella hesitated, suddenly feeling self-conscious. A mix of nerves and embarrassment crawled up her spine. She had never been in this kind of world before, and the air around these women carried an energy she wasn't sure she was ready to embrace. One of them, a tall woman with striking red lips, looked her up and down with a smirk. Isabella, you lost? She asked, amusement lacing her voice. No, I'm here to see Dawn, Isabella replied, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. The 3 women exchanged knowing grins. Dawn, the red-lipped woman called, rapping her knuckles against the door. Just a minute, I'm putting on lipstick, came Dawn's muffled voice from inside. Isabella's here. Seconds later, the door swung open, and Dawn appeared, her lips painted a deep shade of crimson. She took one look at Isabella and grinned. Good decision, Isabella, she said, grabbing her hand and pulling her inside without another word. Girls, help me get her ready. The 3 women followed them in, moving with practiced ease as if they had done this 100 times before. One of them immediately dived into Dawn's closet, rummaging through hangers, pulling out outfits and sandals, while another grabbed Isabella's hair, running her fingers through it with a critical eye. Before Isabella could process what was happening, she was guided into a chair. She flinched slightly as tweezers plucked at her brows, then relaxed when she realized it didn't hurt as much as she expected. Dawn cradled Isabella's chin, inspecting her face like an artist studying a blank canvas. Let's just shape these brows a bit, she muttered before reaching for her makeup bag. A cool mist sprayed across Isabella's face, making her blink in surprise. Then came the foundation, the blush, the eyeshadow, layer upon layer of transformation. She felt the light pressure of a brush sweeping against her eyelids, the tickle of mascara coating her lashes, the soft glide of lipstick painting her lips. "Wow, wow," one of the women murmured, stepping back with an appreciative nod. "You were already pretty, but now? Damn, girl." Isabella turned to the mirror and blinked at her reflection. She barely recognized herself. Her face looked different, smoother, sharper, almost doll-like. Her eyes seemed larger, more alluring, framed by long, dark lashes. Her lips, now plump and glossy, glistened under the light. She tilted her head slightly, taking in the new version of herself, unsure whether to be fascinated or terrified. But one thing was certain, there was no turning back now. "Now, get dressed! Quick! The car's already waiting outside," Dawn urged, her tone leaving no room for hesitation. Isabella hurriedly peeled off her worn t-shirt and pants, her fingers trembling slightly. A chorus of giggles erupted behind her. "What's with that bra and panty?" one of the women teased, eyeing the faded fabric. Isabella lowered her gaze, cheeks burning. "They're old," she mumbled. In truth, they were hand-me-downs from a kind neighbor, the only ones she owned. Dawn rolled her eyes before yanking open a drawer and pulling out a brand new set of lingerie, the tags still attached. "Change into these," she commanded, tossing them at Isabella. "And here, wear this bra too." Isabella hesitated for only a second before nodding and quickly switching into the fresh undergarments. The fabric was softer, smoother against her skin, luxurious compared to what she was used to. "Perfect. Now let's go," Dawn announced. They practically dragged Isabella out of the house and into a sleek car waiting at the curb. During the ride, the others chattered and laughed, tossing inside jokes back and forth, their ease in this world evident. Meanwhile, Isabella sat stiffly, staring at her hands, her stomach twisted into knots. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure they could hear it. Her palms were damp, and no matter how many times she wiped them against her dress, the sweat kept returning. "Be smart, Isabella," one of the women advised, adjusting her lipstick in the car's visor mirror. "Charge a high price. Don't let anyone lowball you." Isabella barely registered the words, her thoughts a chaotic mess. When they finally arrived at the club, Dawn's companion led Isabella straight to the manager. He was a burly man with slicked-back hair and 3 gold-capped teeth that flashed every time he grinned. His eyes flicked over Isabella, assessing her in an instant. "Welcome," he said smoothly. "Do a good job, and they'll keep coming back." Isabella nodded, unsure what else to do. The manager clapped his hands together. "Okay, girls, it's Friday night, so make it count. Go get lots of customers." Isabella expected to be led inside, where she'd be seated at tables, maybe asked to serve drinks or talk to customers. But instead, the women walked right past the entrance and back onto the sidewalk. Confused, she followed them, until she saw the long line of women already gathered outside. Her stomach lurched. They weren't inside the club, they were on the curb, standing in plain sight for passing cars to see. Her mouth went dry. The realization hit her like a slap. Women leaned into car windows, their voices flirtatious, their movements confident. When a vehicle slowed, one of them would immediately step forward, offering a sultry smile. "Watch and learn," Dawn murmured, smirking as she planted a hand on her hip. She grinned at each car that rolled by, exuding charm without an ounce of hesitation. A sleek black sedan pulled up in front of the woman standing beside Isabella. The driver rolled down his window, revealing a middle-aged man. He was well-groomed, neatly dressed, certainly more appealing than Mr. Parker, Isabella thought with an odd sense of detachment. "Hey, handsome," the woman purred, lazily chewing gum as she leaned against the car. The man's eyes raked over her, his expression unreadable. "How much?" he asked. "Good evening, sir," one of the hotel staff greeted as he strode past. He didn't bother asking for a key card, just headed straight for the elevator, his movements brisk, assured. Isabella trailed behind, her steps hesitant. When she failed to step inside immediately, he turned his head, his cold eyes locking onto hers. "You backing out?" he asked, his tone edged with mockery. "No," she replied quickly, forcing herself forward before the doors slid shut. As the elevator ascended, Isabella's pulse pounded so violently she could hear it in her ears. The weight of reality pressed down on her, suffocating, yet her feet remained planted where they were. A soft chime signaled their arrival. The doors parted, revealing a breathtaking sight. A vast, glass-walled atrium stretching before her, offering a panoramic view of the city bathed in golden lights. For a fleeting moment, Isabella forgot everything else, lost in the mesmerizing skyline. It was beautiful. Distant, glowing towers stood like silent sentinels against the night, while cars below moved like tiny fireflies in the darkness. But the spell shattered as he strode forward, his presence commanding, pulling her back into the moment. "Come," he said, leading her down a quiet hallway to a suite. Once inside, he turned to her. "Go shower first." "All right," she murmured, disappearing into the bathroom. The space was massive, larger than the living room of the home she was about to lose. Marble counters gleamed under soft, warm lighting. Plush white towels were neatly folded in a cabinet. Shelves were lined with expensive shampoos, body washes, and lotions, each one infused with rich, luxurious scents. Peeling off her clothes, she stepped under the rainfall showerhead, letting the steaming water cascade over her. She reached for a floral-scented body wash, its fragrance calming yet unfamiliar, and used the hotel's loofah to scrub away the day's grime. Every stroke across her skin felt like erasing the girl she had been just hours ago. When she was done, she wrapped a towel around her hair, then slipped into a white robe hanging on the hook. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out. He was waiting, sitting at the edge of the bed, his posture relaxed, though impatience flickered in his gaze. The moment she entered, he stood and walked past her into the bathroom. That's when she noticed the bathroom walls were glass. Her stomach twisted. Had he watched her shower? Heat flared up her cheeks, and she quickly averted her eyes, pretending she hadn't realized. She focused on drying her hair instead, the soft cotton towel absorbing the lingering moisture. 5 minutes later, he emerged, fresh from his own shower, a towel slung low around his waist. Droplets of water still clung to his skin, tracing slow paths down the hard planes of his chest. He was tall, broad shoulders, lean muscle, sculpted like a model straight out of a luxury campaign. Isabella swallowed, suddenly hyper-aware of her own breath. As he approached, she instinctively stood as well, tilting her head up to meet his gaze. Without a word, he wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. Then he kissed her. Hot, urgent, demanding. Her breath hitched. The force of it stole the air from her lungs, leaving her dizzy. When he finally pulled away, she gasped, an unexpected giggle slipping past her lips. A slow smirk touched his lips as he leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "That tickles," she murmured, shifting beneath him. He pulled back slightly, his expression darkening with mild annoyance. "Sorry," she rushed to explain. "It's my first time. I haven't even kissed anyone before." He stilled. For a moment, his gaze searched hers, as if trying to determine whether she was lying. Then, the corner of his mouth lifted in an unreadable smirk. Without another word, he kissed her again, deeper, more insistent, before pushing her onto the bed. A soft gasp escaped her lips at the suddenness of it. "Satisfied?" he asked afterward, his voice low, husky. Isabella wanted to leave. She needed to get home. But when she moved to sit up, he stopped her. "We're not done," he said simply. Her stomach twisted. She had no choice but to wait until he was finished with her. What surprised her, though, was that somewhere between the urgency of his movements and the heat of his touch, she found herself responding, feeling something unfamiliar, yet intoxicating. By the time he was finally through, her body ached in places she hadn't known could ache. She forced herself up and went to clean herself, but before she could fully gather her bearings, he pulled her back to him again, and again, and again. It wasn't until much later, when exhaustion had fully settled over them, that he finally let her go. "Take a break," he muttered, slipping out of bed. Isabella barely had the strength to lift her head, but when she saw him heading for the door, alarm shot through her. "Wait, who?" She swallowed. "Where are you going?" He frowned, his expression unreadable. "You think I'd leave without paying?" She hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I'm just grabbing something from the other room," he clarified. She nodded, though the unease inside her remained. What if he really did run off? What if this had all been a scam? Sitting up, she wrapped the sheets around herself and began counting the seconds to calm her nerves. Then, the door opened. "Here." She nearly flinched when she saw him standing there, a small sheet of paper in one hand, a pen in the other. He crossed the room and sat beside her on the bed. How much do you really need? He asked. Isabella blinked, caught off guard. They had already agreed on $150,000. Was he questioning it now? Or did he have something else in mind? She hesitated, unsure what game he was playing. Come on, speak up, he pressed. Her lips parted, her heart hammering in her chest. Then, impulsively, she blurted, "What if I told you $1 million?" A nervous chuckle escaped her. "Could you even give me that?" He arched an eyebrow, then let out a low chuckle. "Do you think I'm a liar?" His voice carried an amused edge. "I might be a bad person, but I don't lie." A bad person? Isabella wondered, studying him. She watched as he scribbled something on the small sheet of paper. "Is that a check?" she asked. "Yes. Why?" Her stomach twisted with doubt. "I don't want a check. It might bounce," she admitted quietly. He let out a sharp sigh, clearly growing impatient. "You've got trust issues," he muttered. "My checks never bounce." "I need cash now," she said, her voice small yet firm. For a moment, he simply stared at her. Then, exhaling sharply, he stood and left the suite without another word. Isabella sat frozen, wondering if she'd just pushed him too far. But when he returned, he was carrying a plain paper bag. He handed it to her. "Why put it in a paper bag?" she asked hesitantly. "This is 300, he said. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. 300? She echoed, stunned. They had agreed on $150,000, yet now he was handing her twice that amount. Her fingers trembled as she peeked inside the bag. Stacks of crisp $1,000 bills stared back at her. "This is insane," she whispered, half expecting them to be counterfeit. She pulled out a few bundles, her mind still struggling to process what was happening. Without a word, he tossed a small handheld bill checker onto the bed. "Check them if you want," he said, irritation lacing his voice. Isabella glanced at him, then at the bills in her hand, before shaking her head with a half smile. "I won't." But curiosity burned inside her. Why the change of heart? Why are you giving me that much now? His expression remained impassive. "It's not a gift," he stated flatly. "We're going to talk before you leave." She nodded cautiously, waiting. "Our deal was $150, he continued, "but I raised it to 300. Her pulse quickened. "Why 300? She asked, her voice laced with unease. "Do you plan to keep me?" He leaned back, his gaze locking onto hers with quiet intensity. "Think of it as an advance payment," he said smoothly. "I want you to be my exclusive woman. Whenever I need you, you come to me." Isabella swallowed hard. "I'll keep giving you advances," he went on, his tone cold, calculated, "and I'll use you as much as I want until I'm satisfied." Isabella's heart pounded at the weight of the offer. That was more money than she had ever imagined, enough to change everything for her family. Enough to erase their debts, keep food on the table, and maybe even get her father out of jail. "So, what do you say?" he asked, his tone calm, assured. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the paper bag of cash. "All right," she said finally, "I accept. But how long are you going to, keep using me, I'd like to know?" His gaze remained steady. "Until I get tired of you. Believe me, I'll pay you well." A part of her bristled at the bluntness of his words, but she pushed that feeling down. "Fine," she murmured. If she was being honest with herself, she wasn't exactly at a disadvantage. He was attractive, intimidating, but undeniably handsome. And as far as she could tell, he wasn't in a relationship. Maybe things could have been worse. "Come back here the day after tomorrow," he instructed before walking out of the suite without another glance. For a long moment, Isabella just sat there, leaning against the headboard, her mind reeling. Her 20-something years of carefully guarded innocence had disappeared in a single night. She had always sworn to herself that she would wait, that she would only give herself to the man she would one day marry. But now, that was nothing more than a broken promise, a faded ideal that no longer held any meaning. She sighed, the weight of reality pressing down on her. This was how life worked, wasn't it? People found themselves doing things they once thought impossible when desperation came knocking, when the survival of the people they loved depended on it. Shaking the thought away, Isabella took a deep breath and climbed out of bed. She washed up quickly, then slipped into her clothes, tucking the paper bag of money securely into her cheap purse before leaving the room. Outside, a large man was already waiting for her. Silent and expressionless, he motioned for her to follow. He led her to the elevator, then out of the building, never saying a word. When they reached the curb, a taxi was already idling by the entrance. The man opened the car door for her, then before closing it, he handed the driver a thick bill. $1,000. Take her wherever she needs to go, make sure she gets home safe, he instructed in a firm voice. Isabella's heart fluttered unexpectedly. Emily, he isn't such a bad person, she thought. He had already paid her, yet he was still making sure she had a safe ride home. That had to mean something, didn't it? As the taxi pulled away, she caught herself smiling. A small, involuntary curve of her lips. But it wasn't happiness. It was something far more confusing. She felt lightheaded, overwhelmed, uncertain. By the time she arrived home in the early morning, the sky had begun to shift from deep blue to soft gray. Inside, the house was quiet. Her younger siblings were still curled up in their shared bed, their small faces peaceful in sleep. In the cramped kitchen, her mother, Lyra, was already up, moving about as she prepared for the long day ahead. Lyra sold vegetables at the farmer's market, a grueling job that barely earned enough to keep them afloat. Meanwhile, Isabella's father, Michael, was a construction worker, though jobs weren't always steady. Some months there was work, other months there was nothing. And now he was in jail, for the first time. Isabella clutched her purse a little tighter, feeling the weight of the money inside. Just maybe, things would finally change. Sometimes, her father wouldn't work for days at a time. When that happened, the family barely had enough to scrape by. Her younger siblings tried to help in their own small ways, selling flowers outside the church for a little pocket money, just enough to buy notebooks and pencils for school. Isabella stepped into the kitchen where her mother sat at the rickety wooden table, cradling a mug of coffee between her worn hands. "You're home late," Lyra remarked, her voice laced with exhaustion. She gestured toward the chair beside her, then grabbed a clean mug and poured steaming hot water into it, her movements slow, methodical. Isabella sat down, her fingers tightening slightly around the strap of her purse. "I went looking for money, Mom," she said simply. Lyra's tired eyes flickered with interest. "Did you find any?" she asked, hope creeping into her voice. Isabella smiled, bright, wide, almost triumphant. "Yes," she said, "I did." Her mother inhaled sharply, her expression shifting from cautious disbelief to pure, unrestrained relief. For a moment she looked as if she might cry. "Thank you, honey," she whispered, wrapping Isabella in a tight embrace. "It's nothing," Isabella murmured, gently pulling away. "Hopefully Dad will be home soon." She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick stack of bills, counting out $150,000. Lyra's eyes widened as she accepted the money, her hands trembling. "You should go now, Mom," Isabella urged softly. "You can pay for his bail and settle everything." Still in a stunned daze, Lyra didn't even finish her coffee before rushing out the door, clutching the money as if afraid it would vanish. Isabella watched her mother leave, noticing the glimmer of tears in her eyes. Once the door clicked shut, she turned her attention to the remaining cash. Carefully, she set aside what they owed Andy and another portion for Miss Helen. Then, taking a plastic bag from the cupboard, she divided the rest into smaller bundles, making sure to hide them securely. She had to be smart about this. She might never see this much money again. Then, a thought surfaced. There was a small, rundown house for sale in the next neighborhood. Just $50,000. A simple property transfer, really, but it was a structure that wouldn't be demolished anytime soon. Better to invest in a place of their own than continue throwing money away on rent. Sighing, Isabella stretched out on the thin mattress in the corner of the room. Every muscle in her body ached, her arms, her thighs, and especially that sensitive place between her legs. She shut her eyes, hoping for rest, but sleep wouldn't come. After what felt like an hour of tossing and turning, she gave up. Instead, she got up, brushed off her skirt, and quietly slipped out of the house. She needed to check on that property. Isabella made her way to the local municipal office, determined to verify the official ownership of the property. She couldn't afford to fall for a scam, not when so much was at stake. Once she had confirmation that everything was legitimate, she met with the owner, handed over the full payment, and signed the agreement. By afternoon, the documents would be notarized. They could move in right away. The house wasn't large, nor was it in perfect condition, but it was theirs. No more rent payments draining their pockets every month. More importantly, Lyra could finally set up a small produce stand right outside. The location was convenient, just 2 blocks from a small row of shops, and only a couple of miles from the farmer's market. It wasn't ideal, but it was a start. By midday, Isabella returned home, her heart pounding with anticipation. She was greeted by the sight of her mother and father standing in the center of the room, their younger siblings chattering excitedly around them. Her father had finally been released. The moment he saw Isabella, his eyes welled up with tears. He stepped forward and pulled her into a tight embrace. "I'm sorry, honey," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Isabella swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his regret. "Just promise you'll stop drinking, Dad," she said softly. "I will, sweetie, I promise," he vowed, holding her even tighter. She took a deep breath, then pulled away and cleared her throat. "I have a surprise for you guys," she announced, a bright smile spreading across her face. "We're moving." Her father's brow furrowed. "Wait, are we being kicked out by M. Helen?" Isabella hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. "Well, yes. But I've already paid off everything we owed her, and Dad's debt to Andy too." Her father's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Where did you get all this money?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "And if the rent's paid, why are we moving?" Isabella's heart pounded. She needed a plausible explanation. I closed a big real estate deal," she lied smoothly. "It was a condo extension, and the buyer paid in cash. My commission was huge." Her parents exchanged a glance, their features relaxing in relief. Her mother pulled her into another hug. "We can't thank you enough," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling with gratitude. Isabella forced a smile, pushing down the guilt rising in her chest. "It's nothing," she said, forcing a cheerful tone. "Now, let's start packing. I want us moved in by this afternoon." Isabella sighed as she watched her parents and siblings excitedly gather their belongings, preparing for the move. Their laughter and chatter filled the small house, a stark contrast to the weight pressing heavily on her chest. She had given them a new beginning, yet deep down, she wondered if she would ever be able to forgive herself for what she had done. Still, no matter how conflicted she felt, the outcome was undeniable. Her father was free, their debts were cleared, and they were finally moving into a home they could call their own. For the first time in a long while, her family had hope. That night, however, Isabella's body betrayed her. A burning fever overtook her, leaving her too weak to stand. Every inch of her ached. Her nose wouldn't stop running, and her head pounded relentlessly. Even the simplest tasks, getting up, eating, using the restroom, became unbearable. She remained bedridden for days, unable to return to the hotel as she and the man had agreed. A week passed before her fever finally subsided, though exhaustion still clung to her. She decided to wait until morning before making her way back. But when she arrived at the hotel the next day, she was met with an unsettling reality. "The guest has already checked out," the receptionist informed her. A strange mix of relief and disappointment settled in her chest. "Can I get his name, a phone number, an address?" Isabella asked, grasping for any way to reach him. "I'm sorry, but that information is confidential," the receptionist replied politely. "If he calls, we'll let him know you stopped by," another staff member added. Isabella's heart sank. She had no phone to leave a contact number, no means of finding him on her own. Just like that, he had disappeared, taking with him not just the money, but the entire arrangement. Perhaps, she thought bitterly, this was God's way of stopping her from sinking even deeper into something she shouldn't have started in the first place. With no other options, she focused on finding work. She applied at several agencies, but most jobs were too far away or required experience she didn't have. Thankfully, her father had resumed work, and their small produce stand, though modest, brought in enough to keep them afloat. It wasn't much, but they were managing. Then, a month later, she finally caught a break. A mall nearby offered her a position as a sales clerk. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and Isabella was relieved to have something to contribute. But during her mandatory medical checkup, her world came crashing down. "Miss Rivera, you're pregnant," the doctor informed her. The words echoed in her head, each syllable feeling like a stone sinking deep into her stomach. Pregnant. It felt as if the sky had collapsed on her. Life was already a struggle. How could she possibly bring a child into this world? How would she explain it to her parents? especially when they had no idea what she had done. That dreadful moment arrived sooner than expected. "You're pregnant, Lyra." Her mother's voice trembled with tears, her hands shaking. Isabella barely had time to process the mistake before her father, Daniel, stiffened in shock. Isabella had no choice but to come clean. The truth weighed heavily on her, but there was no way to hide it anymore. She had even returned to the hotel the day before, clinging to the faint hope that she might find him. He needed to know, he deserved to know, what had resulted from that night. She was certain he had used protection. She remembered it clearly, so how had this happened? "I'm sorry, ma'am," the receptionist had said, shaking her head. He never came back. Isabella had left the hotel with a sinking heart, feeling as though she had hit a dead end. "But you don't even have a boyfriend," her father Daniel pointed out, his confusion evident. She wiped her tears and forced herself to lie. "I did, but he left me." Daniel let out a deep sigh. His eyes, filled with sadness, softened as he looked at his eldest daughter, young, pregnant, and abandoned. "Well," he said after a long silence, "it's already here. Don't worry. We're your family and will help you take care of your child." The months that followed were grueling, but they survived. Eventually, Isabella gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy. The moment she held him in her arms, her heart clenched with overwhelming love and fear all at once. She named him Alexander, a name she had stumbled across online. It felt strong, powerful, perfect for her son. But motherhood didn't erase reality. Bills still needed to be paid, and their financial situation remained fragile. Just a month after giving birth, Isabella began searching for work again. "Can't you wait until after Alexander's baptism?" Lyra pleaded. "I can't, Mom," Isabella insisted. "We're already falling back into debt. I have to do something before it gets worse." The only job available through the agency was as a cleaner in various condominium buildings. It was exhausting, but it was work. Without hesitation, she took the position and started the very next morning. By the end of the day, every muscle in her body ached from the relentless cleaning. She was about to leave when she noticed an older woman near the lobby, swaying slightly, her face pale and distressed. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Isabella asked, stepping closer. The woman's eyelids fluttered, then closed. "Ma'am?" Isabella tried again, her voice rising with concern. She quickly scanned the entrance and spotted a security guard. "Sir, over here!" she called urgently. The guard rushed over, followed closely by a few building staff members. Together they helped the woman into a wheelchair, speaking to her in hushed, worried tones. Within minutes she was whisked away by car, presumably to a hospital. Isabella stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding. She could only hope and pray the woman would be okay. Before heading home, Isabella made a brief stop at a nearby church. She knelt in the quiet solitude of the pews, clasping her hands together as she whispered a heartfelt prayer. "Please, Lord, guide me. Help me find Alexander's father. He deserves to know, and my son deserves to know him." The weight of uncertainty pressed heavily on her, but she could only hope that fate would eventually bring them together again. That night, as they sat down for dinner, her mother turned to her with a gentle smile. "How was work today, dear?" Lyra asked. "It was okay, Mom," Isabella replied, forcing a small smile. She didn't mention how utterly drained she felt, how her arms ached from scrubbing floors, or how the scent of disinfectant seemed permanently embedded in her skin. "And how's Alexander?" "He was fussy earlier," Lyra said with a sigh. "Refused his bottle for a while, but once he got hungry enough, he finally took it." Isabella's heart clenched with guilt. She felt sorry for her little boy, missing his mother's warmth all day. Her chest still ached from being unable to breastfeed him, and she had to slip into the restroom at work just to relieve some of the discomfort. But at least now, as night fell, she could hold him close and nurse him properly. After dinner, Isabella sat beside Alexander's crib, gently brushing a fingertip over his soft cheek. He slept so peacefully, his tiny lips parted slightly, his dark lashes resting against his plump cheeks. He really was so handsome, his features unmistakably resembling his father's. Where was that man now? Would their paths ever cross again? She had no expectations of him, but he had a son now. Shouldn't he know? Isabella sighed, brushing away the thought. The next day, after finishing her shift cleaning a vacant unit, her supervisor approached her unexpectedly. "Isabella," he said, "I need you to clean the penthouse today." She blinked, surprised. "The penthouse?" she echoed. On her first day, she had been told that a separate staff member handled the penthouse exclusively. She had assumed it was off-limits to her. Why was she suddenly assigned to it now? But she didn't question it further. "Yes, sir," she responded obediently, gathering her cleaning cart and heading toward the private elevator. As she stepped into the luxurious space, she was immediately struck by the grandeur of the penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the elegant furniture in natural light, and everything looked sleek, expensive, and meticulously designed. A woman lounged on a plush, high-end couch, her legs crossed gracefully. She looked up as Isabella entered. "Hello there," she greeted with a warm yet knowing smile. Isabella hesitated. "Good afternoon, ma'am," she said politely, feeling slightly out of place. So the owner was home. Cleaning while being watched was always a little awkward, but she had a job to do. The woman studied her closely, a flicker of recognition crossing her features. "Don't I know you from somewhere?" she asked, tilting her head thoughtfully. Isabella blinked, taking a closer look at her. Then it hit her. "Oh, you're the lady who almost fainted yesterday," she exclaimed. The woman chuckled. "That's me." Isabella smiled, relieved to see that she was doing much better now. "Come here," the woman gestured, patting the seat beside her. "You can set your cart aside for now. I'm not quite ready for my place to be cleaned just yet." Isabella set the cleaning cart aside, spraying her hands with sanitizer before approaching the woman. "Have a seat, dear," the older woman offered, gesturing toward the couch. Isabella hesitated briefly before sitting down, feeling a little out of place. "How are you feeling, ma'am?" she asked politely. "Much better," the woman said with a small smile. "I had you called up here because I wanted to thank you personally for helping me yesterday. If you hadn't caught me, I might have fallen hard and made things much worse." "Oh, it's nothing," Isabella replied modestly. "I'm just glad you're okay. Did you see a doctor?" "Yes," the woman nodded. "Turns out my blood pressure was a bit high, but nothing serious. I just need to take better care of myself." As she spoke, she studied Isabella intently, her gaze lingering, as though she were trying to figure something out. Isabella shifted slightly, feeling self-conscious under the scrutiny. "You're new here, aren't you?" the woman finally asked. "Yes, ma'am, I just started yesterday," Isabella answered. The woman nodded thoughtfully. "Today, my family and I just arrived back in the country. Our house is under renovation, so we're staying here in the condo for now." Isabella simply nodded, unsure of what else to say. "How old are you?" the woman asked after a brief pause. 20, Isabella replied. "I'll be 21 soon." The woman's expression turned curious. "What's your educational background?" "I only finished high school," Isabella admitted. The woman tilted her head. "Why didn't you go back to school?" "My brother-in-law's foundation offers scholarships. Perhaps I could help." Isabella smiled faintly, cutting her off gently. "I have a child, ma'am, so I have to focus on work." For a moment, the woman looked surprised. "You already have a child?" she asked, eyes widening slightly. "You don't look it at all. I honestly thought you were single." Isabella gave a small, awkward smile. "I am," she said softly. "I'm a single mom." "How old is your baby?" the woman asked, her voice laced with curiosity. "He's 1 month old," Isabella replied softly, a gentle warmth in her tone. So young," the woman sighed, shaking her head. "But this job is pretty demanding. Aren't you overexerting yourself?" Isabella simply smiled, neither confirming nor denying it. She had no choice. Rest wasn't a luxury she could afford. The woman continued, her tone light yet probing. "And the father of your baby?" Isabella stiffened slightly, unable to answer right away. "Oh, I'm sorry," the woman said quickly. "Here I go, prying into your business." Isabella hesitated before responding, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's complicated. He's not really my boyfriend. I don't even know where he is." The woman took a thoughtful pause, scratching her head. "I'm not sure what to say," she murmured, then offered a reassuring smile. "But your baby will bring you luck, dear. A real blessing." Isabella met her gaze and smiled gratefully. "Yes, ma'am, I believe so too." The older woman let out a wistful sigh. "I wish my children would give me a grandchild, but neither of them seems ready." She leaned back, shaking her head as if the thought alone exhausted her. "My oldest is 32. A complete workaholic, always dating different women but never settling down. My younger one is 29, more of a loner. Honestly, I think he might even be a bit of a woman hater. She threw up her hands in exasperation. I want a grandchild so badly I even told my child to consider a surrogate. When you're rich, anything's possible. Despite herself, Isabella chuckled. The woman had a way of making even complaints sound amusing. Their conversation flowed easily, stretching longer than Isabella had expected. At some point, the woman casually ordered lunch for them both. "Eat with me," she insisted, waving off any protest. Isabella hesitated, glancing toward the clock. "I might get in trouble with my supervisor," she admitted, shifting uneasily. The woman smirked knowingly. "And who does your supervisor answer to?" Isabella blinked, realization dawning. "Well, you, ma'am." "Exactly, so sit with me." With no room for argument, Isabella obeyed. The food was delicious, and the older woman kept piling more onto her plate, making her feel both full and slightly embarrassed. She hadn't had a meal this good in a long time. To make herself useful, Isabella cleaned up the kitchen afterward, wiping down the counters and putting away the dishes. The woman didn't stop her. If anything, she seemed amused by Isabella's instinct to help. They continued chatting until about 3 in the afternoon, when the woman decided to take a nap. Taking that as her cue, Isabella finally excused herself and headed downstairs to see if there were other units she could clean before the day ended. Around 4:30, her supervisor approached her with a concerned look. "Your mom's been calling over and over," he said. "Only an hour left before clock out." Isabella quickly pulled out her phone and called home. "Hello, Mom, what is it?" "Isabella, baby Alexander has a cold and a cough," Lyra said anxiously. "We don't have any money left to buy his medicine. We had to pay your siblings' school fees. I'm out of cash." Isabella's heart sank. She gripped the phone tighter. "All right," she said, forcing her voice to stay calm. "I'll see what I can do." She finished her shift as quickly as possible, her mind racing. Who could she turn to for help? Chris, her old friend, had always been there for her in the past, but he was married now and living far away. She had no one else. As she stepped out of the building, she caught sight of the older woman from the penthouse. This time, she was accompanied by a distinguished-looking man, older but strong in presence, likely her husband. "Oh, Isabella," the woman called warmly. "Are you heading home?" Isabella hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yes, ma'am." "We're going out to eat. Come join us," the woman insisted. Then, turning to the man beside her, she added, "By the way, honey, this is the young lady who helped me yesterday when I almost fainted." The man gave Isabella an appreciative look. "Thank you so much for looking after my wife." "It was nothing," Isabella replied politely. Please, come have dinner with us," the woman urged again. Isabella bit her lip. She appreciated the offer, but her mind was elsewhere. "My baby's not feeling well, ma'am," she admitted. "I really need to go home." The woman's expression softened with concern. "Oh dear, he's sick? Where do you live? We can drop you off." It felt awkward accepting their kindness, but the couple insisted, and before Isabella knew it, she was seated in the back of their car. "What's wrong with him?" the older woman asked, her tone filled with concern. "He has a cold and a cough, ma'am," Isabella replied softly. "My mom hasn't taken him for a checkup yet." The woman frowned. "What medicine has he taken so far?" Isabella hesitated. She bit her lip, struggling to hold back the shame welling up inside her. "Actually, we haven't bought any yet," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The older woman's face softened. "Oh dear. I'm sorry, I'm meddling again," she murmured. Then, turning to the driver, she instructed, "Stop near a drugstore." Panic tightened Isabella's chest. She had no money to buy medicine. The lump in her throat grew, and before she could stop herself, tears welled in her eyes. "It's okay," the woman reassured her gently, reaching over to squeeze Isabella's hand. There was no judgment in her touch, only warmth and understanding. The couple exchanged a silent glance, as if they had already come to a quiet agreement. When they arrived at the drugstore, the older woman walked Isabella inside. "Thank you, ma'am," Isabella whispered, feeling overwhelmed. "But maybe we should buy the generic kind." The woman didn't listen. Instead, she confidently asked for the best branded medicine for infants. "It's just a small thing, dear," she said with a kind smile. "I'm glad I can help." Tears spilled down Isabella's cheeks as she accepted the medicine. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. The older woman gently wrapped an arm around her shoulders, giving her a comforting squeeze before they returned to the car. When they pulled up to Isabella's home, she could already hear baby Alexander's desperate cries from inside. Instinct took over. She barely managed a hurried thank you before bolting toward the house. "Mom, he won't take the bottle," Lyra said anxiously, gently rocking the wailing infant. His tiny face was red from crying. Isabella rushed to the bathroom, washing her hands and face before quickly changing into fresh clothes. Then, without a second's delay, she scooped Alexander into her arms. She settled into a chair, bringing him close. As soon as she began nursing, his cries softened and he latched on hungrily. Tears blurred Isabella's vision. She cradled him tightly, overwhelmed with relief. Thank goodness he had no fever, just a cough and cold. That, at least, she could handle. Isabella wrestled with the decision of whether to go to work the next day. Baby Alexander still had a cough, and the thought of leaving him tugged at her heart. But by 7 a.m. she forced herself to push past the guilt. She was too new on the job to risk skipping a shift. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," she whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead as he slept soundly. She had just stepped outside when a familiar car pulled up in front of their house. Isabella froze in surprise as the older woman emerged, carrying bags filled with diapers and formula. For a moment, Isabella just stood there, stunned. "How is your baby?" the woman asked, concern etched across her face. At that moment, Lyra stepped out of the house, pausing in surprise at the sight of the well-dressed stranger. "This is the owner of the condominium I work at, Mom," Isabella quickly explained. Lyra nodded shyly, offering a polite greeting. "Good morning," the older woman said warmly. Then, with a bright smile, she lifted the bags in her hands. "I brought a few supplies for your baby." Isabella's face burned with embarrassment. "Mom, this is too much," she said hesitantly. "You keep saying that, dear," the woman gently scolded. "It's all right. I want to help." She stepped closer, her attention shifting to the tiny bundle in Lyra's arms. As she gazed at baby Alexander, her expression softened with an almost wistful look. "Oh my, he's such a handsome little boy," she murmured. Her eyes brimmed with emotion as she studied him, as if something about his face tugged at her heart. "What's his name?" she asked. "Alexander?" Lyra answered for Isabella. The woman's entire body went still. "Alexander?" she repeated, her voice almost a whisper. Isabella frowned. "Yes, why?" The woman's gaze lifted, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. "That's my eldest son's name too," she said. Turning back to the baby, she gently cooed, "Hello, baby Alexander." At that moment, the infant stirred awake, blinking up at her with drowsy eyes. The woman inhaled sharply as if she had just seen a ghost. "He really doesn't look like you," she observed softly, a strange note in her voice. "Ah." Isabella let out a nervous laugh. "He looks more like his father," she admitted. "I see," the woman murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to Alexander's forehead. "See you again soon, Alexander," she whispered softly before turning to Isabella. "Come on, ride with me to work." During the drive, the older woman fell into an unusual silence, her gaze fixed outside the window, lost in thought. Isabella sensed that something was on her mind, but chose not to pry. Instead, she kept quiet, allowing the silence to settle between them. When they reached the condominium, the woman finally spoke. "You'll clean the penthouse again today?" she said. "I'll inform your supervisor." Without waiting for a response, she walked off toward the elevator, leaving Isabella momentarily puzzled by her demeanor. Shaking off the feeling, Isabella headed to the employees' area to change into her uniform. She gathered her cleaning supplies and made her way upstairs. Upon stepping into the penthouse, she hesitated slightly. Seated in the lavish living room was the older woman's husband, accompanied by another man. He bore a resemblance to the husband, perhaps their son. The older man looked up and greeted her warmly. "Oh, Isabella, good morning." "Good morning, sir," she replied politely. The man gestured toward the younger one. "By the way, this is my second son, Dominic." Isabella turned to him and offered a respectful nod. "Good morning, Sir Dominic." She wasn't sure if she imagined it, but he barely acknowledged her, simply giving the slightest nod in return. From the corner of her eye, she noticed the older man lean slightly toward Dominic and whisper, "She's the young lady who helped your mother." Though hushed, Isabella still caught his words. How on earth was she supposed to clean with all of them sitting there? Just then, the older woman emerged from one of the rooms, now fully dressed and looking elegant as ever. "Set your cleaning tools aside for now and come have breakfast with us," she said. Isabella hesitated. "But ma'am, who's your supervisor's boss again?" the woman teased with a knowing smile. Isabella sighed, suppressing a smile of her own. "You are, ma'am," the woman chuckled, and her husband followed suit. Even Dominic, despite his earlier aloofness, smirked faintly. Isabella had no choice but to join them. "Come on, let's go to the kitchen," the older woman insisted, leading the way. They gathered around a grand dining table, its polished surface gleaming under the soft morning light. The husband took his place at the head, with the older woman seated to his right and Dominic across from her. Isabella hesitated, but the older woman gestured to the seat beside her, gently guiding her down. Before Isabella could protest, the woman began serving her, scooping generous portions of rice, crispy bacon, eggs, and tender beef strips onto her plate. Isabella murmured a quiet thank you, though the attention made her feel increasingly self-conscious. As they ate, father and son spoke in hushed tones about business matters, their conversation drifting over stock prices and corporate strategies. Isabella kept her head down, focusing on her food. Then out of nowhere, the older woman turned to her. "What's your baby's father's name?" Isabella nearly choked. She coughed, quickly reaching for her glass of water. Her pulse quickened as she debated how to respond. Should she make up a name? Admit she didn't know? Before she could decide, the father interjected. "So, your son's name is Alexander?" he mused. At that, Dominic suddenly chuckled. Isabella frowned in confusion. "Sorry," Dominic said, shaking his head with amusement. "It's just funny because my older brother's name is Alexander too." Isabella's heart stilled. "Really?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic nodded just as a deep, familiar voice cut through the air. "Are you guys talking about me behind my back?" Isabella turned toward the voice, and her breath caught in her throat. Standing in the doorway was the man from that night. The same intense gaze, the same sculpted features. Alexander Hiss, dark eyes locked onto hers, his brows furrowing as if trying to place a distant memory. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his tone cold, clipped. Isabella's stomach twisted into knots. "You two know each other?" the father asked, glancing between them. Alexander didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed on Isabella, unreadable. The mother, seemingly piecing things together, murmured, "So your baby's name is Alexander too?" She and her husband exchanged a subtle glance as if sharing a silent realization. Alexander finally moved, striding over to take a seat beside Dominic. Even as he focused on his food, he cast another sharp glance in Isabella's direction. Dominic, sensing the tension, pressed further. "Do you two know each other?" A muscle in Alexander's jaw twitched. Then, with a sigh, he leaned back and said, "Yeah, she owes me money." Isabella's jaw dropped. How could he say that? The audacity of it made Isabella's stomach twist. He was acting as if she had hunted him down, as if she had deliberately placed herself in his orbit. The truth was, she hadn't even known his name until this very moment. The older woman, sensing the tension, looked between the two of them. "Is there some history here?" she asked, her voice laced with curiosity. Isabella's throat tightened. She was too mortified to speak. Across the table, Alexander's piercing gaze remained locked on her, suspicion flickering in his eyes. Did he really think she was some kind of schemer? Then the older woman spoke again, this time more directly. "Isabella," she asked gently, "is Alexander the father of your baby?" The air was sucked from the room. Isabella nearly stopped breathing. She forced herself to glance at Alexander. He had frozen mid-bite, his fork hovering just above his plate. Then he snapped out of it, turning sharply to his mother. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "Let's not dance around it," his mother said calmly. "Isabella, Alexander, did you two have a past? Were you ever involved?" Heat flooded Isabella's cheeks, burning with humiliation. How was she supposed to answer that? "Wait," Dominic cut in, his brow furrowing. "So, you're saying she has a child?" He turned to Isabella. "Hey, lady!" "Alexander, calm down," their father interjected, his voice firm. Then he turned to Isabella, his expression more serious now. "Are you saying you got her pregnant?" The words felt like a hammer striking her chest. Isabella wanted to disappear, She could already see the scenario unfolding in their minds. The struggling young woman who had conveniently landed a job at their condo, secretly carrying their heir. Would they think she had planned all of this? That she had named her son Alexander on purpose? That she was some kind of gold digger? The older woman reached out and placed a comforting hand over hers. "Isabella," she said softly, her tone coaxing. "He's the father, isn't he?" Alexander, who had been silent, suddenly spoke. "You named him Alexander too?" he asked, his voice laced with something unreadable. "Why?" Isabella swallowed hard. "I saw it online and liked it," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic muttered, "This is all very puzzling. You didn't even know his name?" His mother frowned. "How could you not know his name?" she asked, her expression darkening as she considered the implications. For a brief second, her face registered something. Suspicion? A fleeting thought that maybe Isabella had met Alexander under questionable circumstances? But she said nothing. Alexander suddenly pushed back his chair with a scrape, breaking the silence. "I want to speak with her alone," he declared. Before Isabella could react, he reached for her wrist and pulled her to her feet. "Alexander," his mother began, but he was already leading Isabella away, his grip firm but not painful. He tugged her through the penthouse, past the grand living room and into a bedroom, shutting the door behind them with a decisive click. "You didn't keep our agreement that night," Alexander accused the moment the door clicked shut behind them. His voice was sharp, edged with something deeper. "Betrayal, perhaps? You ran off with my money." Isabella stiffened, shocked by the accusation. "I didn't run away," she shot back, her pulse racing. "I got sick and there were problems at home. I returned after 8 days. Ask that hotel if you don't believe me." Alexander's jaw tensed. "They told me you had left. I even came back a month later when I found out I was pregnant, hoping to find you. But you were still gone," she continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. His eyes darkened with something unreadable. Then, after a long exhale, he admitted, "I left the country 7 days later. I waited for you a full week." Isabella swallowed hard, a strange heat creeping up her neck. "I'm sorry," she murmured. Then, with a shaky laugh, she added, "I had the flu. You wore me out that night." Alexander's lips twitched, and to Isabella's surprise, he actually chuckled. It was a deep, warm sound, and for a fleeting moment, he looked even more devastatingly handsome, especially when she thought of how much her baby resembled him. Then, just as suddenly, he asked, "Where is our child?" Isabella blinked, caught off guard. "You believe he's yours? Why wouldn't he be?" His brows knitted together. "Didn't you stay at that place after me? Did you—" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Did you do that kind of work again?" Her stomach twisted. "How could I? I was pregnant," she said, her voice quiet but firm. His expression turned unreadable, his gaze studying her. "I never intended to do that job more than once," she admitted. "You offered to keep me as your woman, but then you disappeared." A bitter smile touched her lips as she averted her eyes. She heard him chuckle again, a softer, almost amused sound. "Finish your meal out there," Alexander said abruptly. "I'll take a shower. Then we're going to see our son. I want to meet him." Isabella's breath hitched. "I have work," she objected. He glanced at her uniform, the simple cleaning attire that now felt unbearably suffocating. "Quit," he said easily. "We'll talk after." Then, without waiting for a response, he turned and disappeared into the bathroom. Isabella stood frozen for a moment, her thoughts a tangled mess. When she finally stepped out of the room, she sucked in a deep breath, pressing a hand to her chest. Her heart was pounding far too hard. "Is Alexander my new grandchild?" The gentle but pointed question made her jump. Isabella whirled around, only to find the older woman standing there, watching her intently. She hadn't even noticed her approach. "Mab, is he—" Isabella hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. The older woman's eyes widened in realization before she let out an excited squeal, pulling Isabella into a tight embrace. "Oh my goodness," she gushed, her joy bubbling over. "So, I really do have a grandchild named Alexander, at last!" She hugged Isabella so fiercely that it nearly knocked the air out of her. From the side, their father let out a deep laugh, shaking his head in amusement. "Well," he said cheerfully, "it seems everything is finally falling into place." The older woman beamed. "This is the best news. I'm going shopping for baby Alexander today. Come with me, honey. she told her husband, before turning back to Isabella with a warm smile. "Welcome to the family, dear." A lump formed in Isabella's throat. Warmth flooded her chest, but beneath it guilt gnawed at her insides. If only they knew the truth. How she and Alexander had met, how their child had come to be. Would they still embrace her so easily if they did? She had barely taken another bite of food before the older woman eagerly took her by the hand, leading her aside to chat. "We need to plan a wedding for you and Alexander," she announced, her eyes twinkling. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. "A wedding?" she croaked. "Sure, Mom," Alexander chimed in lazily, amusement flickering in his gaze. Before Isabella could protest, they were already leaving the penthouse together, Alexander's firm grip around her hand. As they stepped into the elevator, her co-workers, who had been passing by, froze mid-step, their eyes widening in sheer disbelief. Whispers erupted. She instinctively tried to pull her hand free, but Alexander tightened his grip. "You're not going to take my baby from me, are you?" she asked anxiously, once they were in his car, her voice trembling. Alexander glanced at her in surprise. "Why would I do that?" "Because you can afford to," she said, her throat thick with emotion. "You could easily take him from me. Please, don't." His expression softened. "That's not my plan at all," he said. Then, in a quiet but resolute tone, he added, "If I take our child, you come too." Isabella stared at him, her heart pounding. "I want both of you with me," he continued. "I'll bring you to my home." "Wait, what?" Isabella blurted, eyes widening. "You heard me," Alexander said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He shifted gears smoothly, his focus on the road, but his next words sent another wave of shock through her. "I'll talk to your parents. I'm going to marry you." "Stop joking," she muttered, trying to brush it off. Alexander turned to her, his expression unreadable, serious, unwavering. "I'm not joking, Isabella." She exhaled sharply, frustration mixing with confusion. "Women usually chase after you. You're not the type to pay for one, so why did you that night?" "Because I wanted you," he said simply. "From the moment I saw you, I liked you." Her heart skipped a beat. She swallowed, unsure if she believed him, or if she even wanted to. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Do you have a boyfriend?" "What? No," she blurted, caught off guard. "Good." Before she could process his response, he pulled up in front of her parents' house. Panic tightened her chest. "Alexander, let's talk this over," she pleaded. "My parents are going to be shocked." He stepped out of the car like he hadn't heard her. "I'll handle it." "Isabella, why are you back so soon?" Lyra's voice rang from the doorway. Her eyes flicked to Alexander, then down to their intertwined hands. "Who is this?" "Mom? Dad?" Isabella began hesitantly, as her father Daniel stepped outside, his brows furrowing as he studied the stranger. Alexander inclined his head respectfully. "Good morning, sir." Daniel's eyes widened in recognition. "Wait, I know you. You're the future hotel owner my boss's company contracted with." His gaze drifted to their clasped hands, and a flicker of realization crossed his face. Silently, he gestured for them to come inside. Inside, Isabella took baby Alexander from Lyra's arms. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned to face the man beside her. Wordlessly, she extended their son toward him. For the first time, Alexander held his child. A quiet gasp escaped him as he stared down at the tiny face. His tiny face. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, his grip instinctively tightening around his son. "Hello, son," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. He leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to the baby's forehead. "Daddy's here." A shaky breath. "And I'm not leaving you or your mom, ever again." Daniel exchanged a confused glance with Lyra before clearing his throat. "Isabella, what's going on?" Before she could find the words, Alexander squared his shoulders and turned to her father. "Sir," he began, his voice steady, "Isabella and I had a misunderstanding before I left the country. My mother was ill, and we had to travel abroad for her treatment. I never got the chance to say a proper goodbye. We lost contact, and I regret that more than anything. But I'm here now. I won't abandon them again." He took a deep breath, his grip on his son tightening ever so slightly. "I'm asking for your blessing," Alexander said, meeting Daniel's gaze head-on. "I want to marry your daughter." Alexander turned to Isabella, his voice gentler now. From the moment I met you until the day I left, you were all I could think about. I love you, Isabella." Lyra's eyes widened. "He loves her?" she murmured in disbelief. "Even though we don't have much money, you still love my daughter?" "Yes," Alexander answered without hesitation. "Love doesn't care about status. I love her. Please let me marry her." Lyra's gaze flickered to Isabella, searching for an answer. After a long pause, she sighed. "It's Isabella's decision." Alexander reached for Isabella's hand and led her outside for a private moment. "Don't you want me?" he asked, his eyes locked onto hers. Isabella's mind spun. It wasn't that she didn't want him, it was that everything was happening too fast. "I'll give you a week to think it over," Alexander offered. "A week?" she repeated. He smirked. "That's too long." "Fine, 2 days." She rolled her eyes and playfully glared at him, but he only chuckled, clearly amused. That very day, Alexander moved Isabella and their baby into his parents' penthouse. His parents were overjoyed to meet their grandson, showering him with love and affection. Dominic, Alexander's younger brother, instantly took to the baby, doting on him and buying all sorts of gifts. They welcomed Isabella with warmth, treating her not as an outsider, but as family. Alexander, however, remained the same in some ways, moody, intense, sometimes stern, yet with Isabella and their son he was different, gentler, more patient. Now and then he would pull her into a sudden embrace, catching her off guard. Each time, she'd jolt slightly, startled by his spontaneous affection. He only laughed at her reaction. He also refused to let her work anymore, much to the confusion of her former co-workers and supervisor. 3 days later, he approached her again, his arms crossed as he leaned casually against the wall. "Have you made a decision yet?" she smirked. "I thought you said 1 week." "I can't wait that long," he admitted, his tone a mix of playfulness and urgency. She giggled, shaking her head. "You might get tired of me and want to split up." "Who said anything about splitting up?" Alexander shot back, his tone sharp with mock irritation. "Stop changing the subject, Isabella. Are you going to marry me or not?" She pursed her lips, tilting her head. "And what if I don't? Then I'll make you sign the marriage certificate by force," he teased, eyes glinting mischievously. She burst into laughter. "So I don't have a choice?" "None whatsoever," he declared smugly. "Now give me a straight answer while I'm still asking nicely." Isabella exhaled, studying his face, the determination in his eyes, the quiet devotion lingering in his expression. "All right," she said softly. "I'll marry you, but promise me if you ever get bored, you won't—" She never finished. Alexander closed the distance between them, capturing her lips in a deep, tender kiss. "That'll never happen," he murmured against her mouth. "I love once, and it's forever." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes at his unwavering vow. "Then I'll hold you to that," she whispered. "Just promise me, never to hurt me, never to betray me." He gently wiped away her tears, cupping her face. "I promise. I love you, Isabella." "I love you too," she breathed. They married soon after. Alexander ensured their baby's birth certificate was corrected, giving him the full name Alexander Emmanuel, a tribute to both of their fathers. True to his word, he enrolled Isabella in college, supporting her every step of the way. Years later, she graduated with a degree in hotel and restaurant management, an achievement that made him prouder than words could express. Now, Isabella was 1 month pregnant with their second child, much to the delight of Alexander's parents. With Dominic still unmarried, another grandchild was a cause for celebration. One evening, Alexander handed her a sleek envelope. Inside, she found plane tickets. "A trip to Hawaii?" she asked, glancing up at him in surprise. He grinned. "I've been waiting for the chance to steal you away. Now that you're done with school, we deserve a little time to ourselves." He hadn't lost his playful side, nor had his love for her faded in the slightest. He still looked at her the same way he had years ago, with fire, with devotion, with a promise of forever. Isabella gazed at the life they had built together, the family they had nurtured, and realized she wanted nothing more. Once, she had believed she would never emerge from her darkest moments. But God had a plan all along. He led her back to Alexander, a man who became not just her love, but an instrument of transformation and blessing for her family. Her younger sibling had just graduated, while the other two were still in school, their futures secured through full scholarships made possible by Alexander's family connections. Meanwhile, her parents, Lyra and Daniel, now owned a small grocery store of their own, a business they managed with pride, watching it grow day by day. As she stood beside Alexander, watching the sun dip below the horizon, warmth filled her heart. "Are you happy?" he asked, his voice gentle against the evening breeze. "More than words can say," Isabella whispered, leaning into him. It was their last evening in Hawaii, and she cherished every second of this fleeting yet precious moment together. "I love you, babe," Alexander murmured, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. She smiled, lifting her face to his. "I love you more, babe." And in that moment, as the waves whispered against the shore, she knew. This was the life she had once only dreamed of, and it was finally hers. Life has a way of leading us exactly where we need to be, even when we least expect it. Isabella thought she had lost everything, but in the end she found love, family, and a future she never imagined. This story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, there's always hope, and sometimes the most unexpected encounters can change our lives forever. What do you think about Isabella and Alexander's journey? Do you believe in fate or second chances? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more inspiring content. See you in the next video.